Cambridge University's Vice-Chancellor Stephen Toope has announced that he'll be standing down for his position in September 2022. In this announcement, he said, "I take a great deal of pride in our accomplishments, which were built together as a collegiate Cambridge community. But at the same time, the upheaval of COVID has led me to reassess my own years ahead from a personal perspective. Being near my own family and friends is more important than ever." So what will his legacy be? Douglas Murray writes for The Spectator's website this week that his time in the post had been an unmitigated disaster. To explain, Douglas joins me now. Douglas, thank you for coming on today. Stephen Toope has resigned, so what do you think is really behind it?
The Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge has said that he is going to step down early from his tenure because he wants to spend more time with his family, which may be the case. It's a rather famous, infamous cop-out phrase normally, certainly in British politics. People say they want to spend more time with their families when they know no one else wants to spend time with them generally. But yes, so that's his claim. It's very unlikely to be true. Stephen Toope's tenure at Cambridge has been marred by a whole set of controversies, battles within the university and indeed with the wider culture that have mattered very much. And Stephen Toope has been losing these battles one by one. He's brought an enormous amount of negative attention to Cambridge University. Most observers have recognized that his tenure in position has been absolutely lamentable. And so I think it's rather obvious, you don't really need to read between the lines to come to this conclusion, that he's leaving because he's no good at the job and everyone knows it.
And what about China? Do you think that that has played a role in his demise?
This is very interesting. The Spectator, of course, we ran a cover piece about this just a couple of months ago, about the extraordinary way in which Stephen Toope's period in Cambridge has coincided with an amazing amount of sucking up to the authorities in China for funding and more. And our cover piece, which exposed that, was not able to be refuted by Cambridge University. A few lackluster attempts to try it, but nobody could deny the facts. I mean, they start from the fact that very shortly after his tenure began at Cambridge University, Stephen Toope went straight to the Chinese embassy and had his photographs taken and talked about the importance of greater cooperation between the authorities in China and educational institutions in the UK, such as his own. Cambridge, during his tenure, took significant amounts of funding from Chinese government-linked organizations and backers. And there were many, many reports, as we laid out in our cover piece, of academics and others who saw that this was a completely contrary to a university's interests, and that the involvement of the Chinese authorities in Cambridge clearly compromised free academic inquiry. It was an extraordinary misjudgment. Stephen Toope couldn't defend it, and I think it's certainly one of the reasons why he's going.
Are you hopeful then that, although the successor has not yet been appointed, we could start to see actually a reversal when it comes to the university's approach to dealing with China?
I would certainly hope so. What Stephen Toope's tenure at Cambridge shows is something wider just than the China question, though. See, what's so striking about it is that a vice-chancellor of a British university should be sucking up to the Communist Party of China at the same time as instituting a whole set of new speech codes himself, or trying to, within Cambridge University. Stephen Toope forever talked during his tenure about academic freedom whilst overseeing the trashing of it. As I said on the Spectator Online this week, his tenure, for instance, coincided with the sacking of a young academic called Noah Carl from one of Cambridge's colleges, purely because a mob of completely uninformed students claimed that Carl's research was in some way racist, and he was fired, and that was overseen by Toope. That was a complete demolition of the principle of academic freedom. whereby mobs cannot simply turn up outside colleges and demand the firing of people whose research they don't understand. More infamously, perhaps, Stephen Toope oversaw and defended the very ignominious firing of a better Canadian than himself, Professor Jordan Peterson, who a few years ago was meant to have taken up a visiting professorship, that is, a non-paying fellowship at Cambridge for a term in the theology faculty. And that invitation was rescinded by the authorities at Cambridge when it was discovered that at a meet and greet after an event, one of the thousands of people who Jordan Peterson had been photographed standing beside was somebody wearing a T-shirt that said, "I'm a proud Islamophobe." And for standing beside somebody with a T-shirt that's controversial, Stephen Toope said, yes, it's correct that this man Jordan Peterson, should have his offer of a visiting fellowship removed. So there were very strange rules that were going on in his time. Perhaps it might also be said that he oversaw other types of controversy in Cambridge without being able to manage them either. There are quite a lot that I list in the Spectator online that show that actually Stephen Toope, in his tenure at Cambridge, had very little understanding of academic freedom, which is perhaps why he found the Chinese authorities so amenable.
Now, we've covered some of the issues during Toope's reign in that position, but I suppose the big question as to whether this will mark a change in direction is who will be his successor. Do we have any idea there?
No, we don't yet. My suspicion will be that Toope and the Toopites or Toopians will try to install somebody Toope-like to succeed him, perhaps somebody who's learned from his errors. But I would hope that Cambridge University, which is one of the jewels in the crown, not just of British intellectual life, but the intellectual life of the world, could do rather better than that. There are a few people that worked actually quite recently when I wrote about Stephen Toope in the Telegraph. A small band of his loyalists wrote a factually inaccurate riposte to my piece, claiming things that weren't true. And I would imagine that that small band of loyalists would try to find somebody like him to be his replacement. But there would be many, many people, in fact, almost anybody who'd be better in the position than he was. And there are quite a lot of reasons for that. And there's one other which perhaps I should lay out, which is that Toope in his time consistently oversaw and led efforts to crack down on free speech within Cambridge University. There was the infamous case last December when he tried to push through a whole set of rules that included the demand that all professors and faculty and students would have to respect the opinions of others. And a number of sharp-eyed academics at Cambridge, which there are no small number of, noticed that the demand to respect somebody else's opinion is quite wrong. There's no reason why a totally fallacious opinion, for instance, should be respected. And they changed the wording to tolerate other opinions, which may seem like a small semantic difference, but it's a whole world of difference when you're discussing and debating difficult issues, for instance, which is quite exactly what people at university should be doing. So Toope lost that vote. He subsequently tried to push through an even more authoritarian, basically, set of demands. He published, the university published a whole set of new rules which included rules on the reporting of microaggressions. Microaggressions, as I often say, are things so small that they almost certainly don't even exist in a lot of cases. But the reporting of microaggressions at the university was encouraged. People were encouraged to, for instance, report anonymously on other students or faculty who are claimed to have made or committed a microaggression. And an example of a microaggression was the raising of an eyebrow whilst any member of any minority group was speaking. As I said at the time, a Cambridge where you couldn't raise an eyebrow isn't a Cambridge that many of us would recognize. But this was published, and I and others said this is not worthy of an institution of Cambridge's stature to push through such ridiculous demands. And Stephen Toope and his loyalists at the time pretended, firstly, that the thing that they had published didn't say what it said. Then Toope admitted he hadn't read it before he published it, and I think then claimed that the dog had eaten his website or something like that. He used every excuse in the book. And again, this culture he tried to push through has to be reversed. It has to be chucked out. There can be no truck with this. It's not a serious set of demands or claims that are fit for a serious institution. So we just have to hope that the institution is taken back into the hands of grown-ups rather than the people fighting a sort of imported woke karate culture war and trying to impose it on one of the jewels in the crown of world education. But as I say in my piece at the Spectator website this week, the reason why I object to it is, to steal a line from the great Evelyn Waugh, is because watching Stephen Toope in charge of Cambridge University was like watching a delicate, valuable Sèvres vase in the hands of a chimpanzee. The man careered around with this precious thing and didn't seem to mind if he smashed the whole thing. He seemed to have no idea of the value of the thing that was in his hands, seemed to think it was a sort of version of a rather bland Canadian bar organization, but without the thrills and without the pay, it has to be said. So hopefully the university will be wrestled back by some of the many, many brilliant men and women who work there, and it should be for the many brilliant students who study there and should expect much better than they got in the era of Toope.
And just finally, Douglas, the government has been looking at things like a freedom of speech bill, which could see, when it comes to campuses, fines or sanctions for those who are in breach of it. Do you think that could be a useful tool, or is that the wrong approach?
It could be. I'm slightly skeptical about it. I'm rather skeptical of the concept of the free speech czar and other such things. I mean, whoever it is would have to be purer than Mother Teresa or Gandhi or anyone else. I don't think such a person will be able to be found or agreed upon. So I am slightly skeptical of the government's actual proposals, whilst lauding the principles behind them. It just has to be stressed that universities must be places for free inquiry at the very highest level. They must be places of robust debate and discussion and discovery, and they should not be able to be treated like the sort of nursery gardens that they have been in recent years. So I very much hope that the situation does change at Cambridge. But there's one final point I might make on this, which is that it's very important, I think, for people to realize one lesson that should be taken from all of this. Occasionally, people have said, why are you so invested in this issue of Cambridge University's Vice-Chancellor? And it isn't just, as I say, because it seems to me to matter very much that our institutions aren't taken over by people who are unworthy and unfit for them, but also because it's very important that people realize that when you get sort of Whitmerpool-like bureaucrats like Toope, it's very important that people realize that they largely succeed because they parrot and then get ahead of the particular dogmas of the era and then punish people who aren't parroting exactly the dogmas. And people like Toope rise up in public life and take over institution after institution because they keep ahead of that lamentable curve, and they think that there's only something to gain from doing so. And for them, in the short term, that might be correct. They collect salaries of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. They benefit very nicely from it. But what I suggest is that people see that as well as people being able to benefit from getting ahead of this, I think, lamentable curve, there are also dangers from doing so, and there are punishments indeed for doing so. I think that Toope should be seen to be a moral story there. It's one of the things that happens when you try to make people who are smarter than you follow through on dumb ideas and dumb dogmas. One of the things that can happen from that is that people will rebel. you will actually be chucked out or effectively be forced to leave your job. There is a downside to being too woke as well as an upside.